So hello everyone, and welcome to this new podcast, 10 Questions About Cloud. Today we have a very special guest because she is the first woman in the podcast, as well as today is the International Women's Day. So thank you very much for joining us, and welcome Julie Elkins.
Hi, thanks so much. I'm happy to be here.
So I always use the first question, basically to introduce yourself. So who you are, what you do.
So my name is Julie Elkins. I'm an AWS training architect at A Cloud Guru, and I create courses, content labs, practice questions, exam questions for students to either help them with their certification process or just to help them learn some new skills for their job.
Wow. Yeah, again, thank you very much for joining us because it's really a pleasure for me having you here. I'm a huge fan of all what you do. I follow you on your YouTube channel. I follow you on the community, basically. And I also have to admit that I started my cloud journey with A Cloud Guru. That was basically the first time, or my first course, so to say. So really happy.
Oh, nice. That's great to hear.
So the second question is basically, because I'm curious now, how was your cloud journey? Maybe you can tell us, when was the first time that you heard about the cloud?
Well, mine probably is similar to others out there. I was a government contractor for a government agency, and I was the administrative assistant for a team of 81. And my team, we were responsible for the infrastructure. And as most government agencies are doing these days, they started to move to the cloud. And I had been taking some SharePoint Udemy courses because I was getting all this SharePoint work built, dumped into my lap, and our team wanted a SharePoint site, and I just didn't know how to do that. So I started taking these courses, and during one of our all hands meetings, the program manager, told the team that, the government agency is moving to AWS or moving to the cloud. And if you wanted to keep working and keep supporting this client, you needed to go out and get smart on AWS, and he'd love to see some certifications coming in. And so I stopped my SharePoint courses and I started looking into AWS courses. My first course was A Cloud Guru course taught by Ryan Cronenberger. But I was really struggling because I was completely new to IT. I didn't have any experience, no background. So I didn't know where things sat, how they communicated together. I couldn't picture it in my head. So one of our senior Windows VMware engineers, he said, check out Linux Academy. So I bought the Linux Academy Udemy course, and they had this really cool hands-on interactive diagram that shows you where everything's set, how things communicate. And, for me being a newbie and not having that background and that experience to go off of, that's when it really started clicking with me. So I took the exam just to see how I would do. And I was the fourth member out of the team of 81 to actually get a certification. So that was pretty amazing. And I just kind of fell in love, and I just kept going. I got my developers next and just kept going through there. And, that's kind of how I got started. And I think there's a huge gap for people who are new to IT and they want to get into IT. There's courses out there that you can get the training and get the understanding and the knowledge. But if you're new like me and you don't have those fundamentals, it's really hard to find a good course that has fundamentals in it. And then after you get the certification or you pass the course, it's really hard to get that first job because, organizations and employers, they want you to have all of this experience. And you're just like, let me have a chance to get that experience. So that's kind of my passion, is helping people bridge that gap. And then, to be able to change their lives the way that I did, because ACG and Linux Academy, they were a huge help in me being able to do that.
Well, really interesting. And I can totally agree with you that the first step to the cloud is quite complex because there is like a huge jump between technologies, or even if you don't have the background. But yeah, I really like you're passionate about showing others, inspiring others, and just doing as a bridge between technology and knowledge.
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's doable, but it's tough. And I think it's going to get easier. I hope it'll get easier.
All right. So let's continue. You already know how many advantages the cloud offers, but in your opinion, what are the most important ones?
Well, I think the biggest advantage of the cloud is the pay-as-you-go model. But so you can. But the problem with that, and where I see organizations getting in trouble with that, is you have to know, you have to know the services and the tools, and you have to know your own environment. So you first have to look like, what does my current environment need, and how can I get that into AWS or Azure or Google? Um, and so I think the best thing about the cloud is you can easily and quickly spin up anything that you need. And then you pay for what you use. But then paying for what you use, sometimes you can get in trouble if you don't know how that service is being calculated. So, but I think that that's the biggest advantage, is things can move. Like, you have a much quicker time to market if you have an application or a business that you're trying to get out there. But I think the biggest thing is that you only pay for what you use.
Yeah, that's essentially one of the biggest advantages. I also agree on that. I mean, if you know how to architect a solution or an application, then you also know how to optimize these costs. If you don't know how to architect an application or a solution, then the cloud can be really expensive. And that's, yeah, it can be really, really expensive. So that's the key point. Cloud knowledge, cloud skills, know how to use it, know the basics, know the background. Why does it work in that way and not in another way?
Yeah, AWS actually has a great kind of program that they recommend that you run. It's called a Cloud Center of Excellence. And basically, it's just a team of people that know the environment, know AWS. They pay attention to new releases, new tools and services. And they're constantly keeping up with what you're using, what you need. Because, even on-premise environments, they're constantly changing. And so you have to make sure that you're constantly reviewing those changes and keeping up, with what needs to be done with any new additions or anything that you stopped using. Like, let's say you were using a couple of EC2 instances and that project finished, and, those EC2 instances might just be sitting there idle, when they could be terminated and not paid for. So I think that that's a really important feature that a lot of organizations miss out on, is creating that team or that Cloud Center of Excellence, so that there's a focus. Like, if you're moving to the cloud, you have to know what you're doing, because it's similar to on-premise environments, but then again, it's completely different.
Yeah. So I essentially believe that cloud computing knowledge or cloud computing skills are going to be a standard in the IT industry. Like, anyone in the IT industry is going to need to understand how the cloud works, and having at least kind of the very basics or the fundamentals of the cloud in order to get a job, or essentially to understand how the IT industry works. What do you think about that?
Well, I I think cloud is here to stay. Coming from my previous job where we managed the infrastructure and on-premise environment. So we had a data center, and when I left, we were just starting to move to AWS and starting to spin up EC2 instances for the applications. But most of the engineers that I worked with were really resistant to learning AWS. They kept saying things like, cloud is just a fad. There's an ebb and flow, and everything comes back to on-premise. And they really weren't wanting to take the time to learn or to understand how to migrate or any of that, which I found really frustrating, because that's where the customers was wanting to go. But I think, it is different. And there's a lot of senior engineers out there that just want to do things the way they've always done them, But I think one of the key things in technology is that continual learning. Like if you're going to keep up with technology, whether cloud is here to stay or not, it's here now. So you have to keep up. You have to keep learning and keep evolving and keep, making sure that you're using the best services that you can, for your environment or your applications or whatever you're doing. So I think that that's really important. And I think it's going to stick around, especially like for disaster recovery. The cloud is a great place to hold your disaster recovery because you can do it at different levels and different cost. Um, but it's a great place. So if you have a major disaster and your data center is out, then you can quickly bring your, cloud environment online and have a very minimal amount of downtime. So I think there's advantages, and you never know what's going to happen. Everything might just go back to on-premise. We just don't know, but it's definitely here now. I mean, everything cloud is just getting bigger and bigger. Like Azure is taking off. Google is growing, daily. I see Google growing. So I think it's just really important, to wonder what's going to happen in the future, because that's a way that you can be a great engineer or senior engineer, is to know where the technology is going and get there first. So yeah, I hope it stays. That's my opinion. It's here to stay.
Right. Yeah, I also share the same opinion. However, I would like to add that there are some use cases, or there will be always use cases where on-premise or a data center by your own is going to be always a need. And this is not going to kind of disappear from one day to the other. But for the most of the cases, I will say the cloud offers too many advantages comparing with owning a data center. And yeah.
I agree with that. Like, especially for government agencies, it doesn't really make sense to put your badging stuff, how people badge in and out of the office in the cloud. Because if they move it from on premise to the cloud, then it has to go out to the cloud and come back. Or like print servers, like HVA systems, there's definitely some things that are needed to keep on premise.
All right. I know you are very focused on AWS and you have a lot of knowledge on AWS. However, you already mentioned other cloud providers such as Microsoft Azure or GCP. What are for you the key factors of each cloud provider, or what would you recommend just AWS?
Well, AWS is my favorite, of course. That's, my first love. I just absolutely love it. But I think, if you're going to move to the cloud, there are things that you have to consider. You have to look at your current environment, and then look at, let's say, for example, how each cloud provider handles access and authorization. Or also service limits. How does each cloud platform handle service limits? Can you get more than is needed? Like with AWS, you can always ask for more. Most things, I believe, you can extend that. There are some hard limits where you can't, and that's probably similar with all of those. But with like access and authorization, AWS gives you IAM, which is Identity Access Management, for free. But Microsoft Azure, they use, they have like a Active Directory IAM system. I'm not really too familiar with it, but I know that you have to have that product, or you have to have a license to use that product. So, AWS, of course, is my favorite, but AWS might not work for your environment or what you need. And so I think it's really important. And it goes back to the basics of understanding what it is that your environment needs to do, and then finding the best fit. Because they're similar, but there are some big differences. So you just have to kind of do some exploration and again, kind of have that Cloud Center of Excellence team that keeps up, not with just the cloud that you're using, but other clouds as well, because maybe, Azure Active Directory is going to work better for your environment, than IAM would. So I think it really just depends. I think they're all great services. Like we have a team for each we have an Azure team and a Google team, and I've started learning a little bit more Azure. I'm just the very beginning of it, just because I'd like to get more multi-cloud experience and knowledge. But yeah, I think they all have great options. I think it just depends on, what's going to be the best one for your use case.
Yeah, you touch really very important points. One point which I consider one of the most important ones is basically the team. Is your team already skilled on a cloud provider? Then go for that, because this will obviously accelerate a lot the cloud adoption. This will also make the things very easy. Because you already mentioned the cloud providers, they are similar, but they are not the same. So getting the skills from another cloud provider, it means you will have to invest time and probably also money on
training. Yeah,
exactly, on getting your team into that cloud provider. However, this follows to the next question, which you already mentioned, which is multi-cloud. Is a tendency that the enterprises are moving into this, let's say, cloud strategy on adopting different cloud providers, because there are some use cases where they prefer to use one, and in other cases where they prefer to use the other one. And yeah, what do you think about this approach?
Well, I think that it's really interesting to use multi-cloud. I've only heard of a few places, a few organizations that have actually gotten it right. I think the setup to have the multi-cloud environment is more difficult to set up, and not only that, to make sure that it scales the proper way. I definitely I don't think that currently there's like a set document that you could follow to do multi-cloud. But I have been seeing like the government agency I used to work for, they do Azure, but they've been bringing in more and more. I mean, they use AWS, but they've been bringing more and more Azure into their environment. So they're headed down that. They haven't, as far as I know, implemented, the multi-cloud, but they're definitely considering more and more the Azure services over the AWS services. So I think that, if it makes sense for your organization, for your use case, I think that that's a great thing. I think you just have to be very careful, how you set it up. And then again, have that team behind you that knows what they're doing.
Yeah, it definitely adds more complexity, because you have to maintain two different platforms. You have to skill your team in two different platforms. Well, I'm talking about two, but it can be three or more. But yeah, it definitely adds a lot of more complexity. But sometimes it's also mandatory or necessary, depending on the use case.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. As you already know, the cloud ecosystem is very broad, and it is very, very difficult to know about each of the topics that the cloud covers. For example, machine learning, serverless, databases, IoT. There are a lot of topics, which is basically your focus, or what are the topics you are more interested in?
Well, one of the things I'm trying to do right now is to get to that senior level. Since I'm new to IT, and I've been looking for a path, and like, how do you become an AWS expert, or a senior engineer, or a senior training architect? And there's not really clear direction out there. So that's really difficult. So what I've been doing is just trying to get a general understanding, of databases is my weak area, but I'm getting much better at databases. But, databases and machine learning and networking is another weak area for me. I cannot get subnetting to stick in my head. I'm fine if I use a calculator or cheat sheet or whatever, but subnetting just completely on my own, I never get it right. But I think my big focus is on fundamentals. And I think fundamentals are really great for new people, but I think they're great for senior engineers, because sometimes, and in IT, most people have that specialty, like they're into networking or they're into databases or machine learning or security. And so they may not have the fundamentals of a different aspect. And, with these cloud providers, you kind of have to have a fundamental of the whole system and how it works and how things interact. So that's been my focus. I've really been into networking and serverless lately. Been listening to a lot more podcasts and webinars and Twitch sessions. Um, but I don't really have the experience in that depth really to have a specialty except for in fundamentals because, that's what's easiest for me and that's where I have the most experience. But it's always interesting to see where people specialize um, and knowing all of the AWS services. Like once someone told me, if you want to be an AWS expert, you just have to know all the services. And that's impossible because new services come out every day. And so you're never going to catch up. You're never going to know them all. So it can be really frustrating, to find that specialty. But I think, the more you learn and the more experience you get, that specialty just kind of comes to you. You kind of get down that path. Anyways, I'm hoping that that's what happens with me. I hope that I'm really leaning more towards networking than I have been serverless lately, but serverless I just find fascinating. But there's so much out there to learn. And, it can be a little bit overwhelming, but you just have to piece it up and take it one day at a time.
Yeah, it takes time, and you don't have to get frustrated because the key thing is just to learn every day at least one small thing, but every day continue learning. That's what I will recommend, for example. And for becoming a specialist in any of the topics I mentioned, you need to understand the fundamentals, and you have to know very, very, very good how these fundamentals works, because the specialties are on top of these fundamentals work.
Exactly.
And that's the key, I will say.
Yeah, I love that, learning every day. I think that's also key as well.
I mean, there are so many things to learn. If you don't try to learn every day at least one thing, it's going to be too much at the end.
Definitely.
Yeah. So I see that you are very, very active in social networks and sharing all your knowledge with the community. I really love that. Could you please share with us, when did you started with that, or what are you doing exactly for the community?
I started back in 2018 because I was asking for more AWS cloud experience for my current job, and really wasn't getting it because I didn't have that experience. And even though I had the certification, it just wasn't enough for them. So to build my resume out, I started my YouTube channel for two reasons: to build up my resume and to so on my resume I could say, hey, check out these projects that I've built and I'm working on, and or check out this research I've done on FSX, or just different things like that. But also, to give a chance to pay that back to everyone else, to give them a chance to learn AWS or learn how to get into IT. That's not at a premium, because when I was starting out I could only afford Udemy courses just because they're always on sale. And I was a single mom with two daughters, and just I couldn't afford a monthly subscription or a yearly subscription or anything else like that. So I just was trying to give an opportunity, and I still am trying to give people a chance to get some content that doesn't cost money. So if they're interested, if they're passionate about it, and they're out there looking for a way to change their life, there's a little bit here that you can check out. I just started a study group for the AWS Certified Solutions Architect exam. I just have had a lot of students reaching out for, I hope that this is what they need. It's like some people learn by watching. Some people learn by doing. I just helped the guy pass his sysops exam. He failed it 3 times, and he reached out on LinkedIn to me, and he's like, please help me. I don't know what I'm doing. So I created this 36-page Google Doc for him with just questions. So I went back, because I still use pen and paper a lot. I went back to my SysOp notes when I set for that exam and just typed them into the Google Doc. And I didn't give him the answers. I just gave him questions, and I looked at the SysOps exam that we carry at ACG to try to see, what he needed. And he was a lot like me. Like, he didn't have the experience and the knowledge behind it. And SysOps was his first exam. He didn't do the CSA or the developers first. He went boom, straight to SysOps. But he ended up passing last week, like midweek Wednesday. I think he was like, I passed. But I think having those questions and having to answer that himself instead of listening to someone tell him, or, even doing it, because sometimes you can follow a video and like do our hands-on labs, but you may not be really understanding what you're doing. You're just following what you're being told to do. So that's where I'm trying to get, like everyone's different. Everyone needs something different. And there's not mentoring out there. There's not, steps to take that works for this type of learner versus this type of learner. And we are working on that at ACG, like trying to come up with different ways to reach all learners. It's just really hard because there's such a broad range of how people learn. So I hope that helps. I built my own blog site. I have a WordPress site that I run. I built it on 2 EC2 instances, and I had a database behind it for a while, but that got kind of pricey. So I cut that one out. But just, I started doing things to get that experience and to be able to build up my resume and show all the employers out there, like, I don't have knowledge and experience of a senior engineer or a mid-level engineer, but this is what I can do. So, and I think that a lot of people just don't know what to do or how to do it or what companies are looking for. I always tell everyone, apply. If you see a position that you want, apply for it, because even if you don't get it, you get that opportunity to learn from that and to see what it is that employer is looking for. And then you can have a better focus, and you can go back and focus on that focus and get it done, and then go back out there and get maybe that job if it's still open or a similar job. So, and, I just try to spread that on LinkedIn as well, Twitter. I'm not as active on Twitter as I am on LinkedIn. And then I have Instagram too. Just, trying to reach as many people as possible.
Yeah, I have to say, I really love what you are doing, because you are giving the opportunity for many, many people to get at least the first impression of the cloud, and even to learn. And if they want to deep dive, then can go to a cloud guru, or they can go to the console, to the AWS console, and try by themselves. But you are just giving them the first, let's say, touch with the console or with the products of AWS or other cloud providers. And I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, we also have a 7-day free trial, which I think is amazing.
Yeah.
And I recommend that to students who, are right before their certification exam. If they can't afford a subscription, you go check out that 7-day free trial, try some of the hands-on labs. Because if you do know what you're doing in the labs and you get a question on your exam, that hands-on doing, it helps solidify that. And so that when that exam question pops up, you have a better chance of remembering, what it is that you need to answer, to get that answer correct. And then we also have a free tier plan, which isn't very well known, but like every month we add new courses, and it's completely free. You'll see mostly like essentials and fundamental courses in the free plan, but every so often they'll pop in a cert course, or some deep dives. I mean, it changes month to month, but I think that that's also a really amazing opportunity as well, because you can, even if you aren't seeing the course that you want, you have an opportunity to build a foundation and take courses that's going to help you get to that level, or maybe get a good understanding, and then you can find answers on YouTube or, like the reInvent videos that AWS puts out. They're really great. They have a lot of great information, and they layer theirs by like 100, 300. I forget the others, like 500 and 700. And it's like the different depth that the YouTube videos will go into. And so I don't know about Azure and Google, but I'm sure they do something similar. And there's just a lot of free content out there. Um, it's not really advertised. So a lot of students and people looking for it, they don't know that it's there.
Yeah.
But it is.
It is there. So we talked before about the continuous learning or learning at least one thing every day. I would like to know what was one of the latest things that you learned. It can be something technical. It can be a tool related to the cloud.
Well, one of the things that I just recently learned, and I really enjoyed it, was I created a hands-on lab for site-to-site VPN connections. And I've always wanted to do that. And you can walk through in the AWS console, the steps of it, but then you get to having to configure the on-premise side, and that's kind of where you get stuck.
Yeah.
Because I don't have an on-premise environment to play with. But in the lab, I just used another VPC as an on-premise environment and spun up an EC2 instance. And then, we installed some VPN open or software on that to use as an on-premise. And that was a lot of fun because, I do need help in networking. So I feel a lot better being able to set that up. And it did take a lot of troubleshooting to get it right. But that was really fun, to setting up that connection and then seeing it work, being able to ping back and forth between the two VPCs. So it was a lot of fun. Cool.
Really interesting. And just the last question, which is essentially information about cloud. You already mentioned that there is a lot of content out there which is for free. There are a lot of communities there. You are even growing a new one or your own community. But sometimes there is, too much information and it's difficult to focus or to follow just one. I would like to know which sources do you use to keep yourself up to date, or which would you recommend to the listeners to follow?
I love white papers, and white papers can be really dry and really boring, but they have a lot of information. You have to be careful because a lot of the white papers are older, like they might be 2017 or 2018. And so they're a little bit outdated, but it does give you a fundamental understanding. And most of them haven't changed that much. One of my favorites is the AWS Well Architected Framework. And it was just updated, I think, last July or August. Maybe July, but they're really great. Like, they step it out. This is what you need to do. And they explain things. So that's usually my go-to when I'm looking for that in-depth, fundamental knowledge and how to set things up. The AWS Well Architected Framework, it doesn't get enough love, but it's really amazing because that's the basic of setting up your environment. I also use a lot of YouTube videos. A lot of the reInvent videos are really great and they're free. Of course, I use our training, Linux Academy and ACG. I take like machine learning courses or Python courses. I'm taking a Python course right now because I can read and understand most Python, but I'm really bad at writing it. And I know what I want the Python to say, but getting that, in a command is really hard for me. So I've been trying to take a deeper dive into Python. But YouTube channels are great. There's a lot of great information out there for free on YouTube channels. There's, I should have written it down, but I'm in the AWS Community Builders. It's a program. It's really great that AWS runs. But there's a developer in there, and he just started a new YouTube channel. And he is doing like infrastructure as code and really great content, great video, easy to understand. And, his layout and the way he designed it is just really amazing.
Yeah, we can leave his social networks in the description, no problem.
Okay. Yeah, I can get it for you. And then I also like LinkedIn posts. There's a lot of great information on LinkedIn, and not just dealing with training, but you can also see like, especially around security and machine learning, there are a lot of great articles about what organizations are doing and what they're looking for. And so if you're new to IT, it's a really great way to try to figure out if you're wanting to get into security, this is what the security industry is doing, and this is kind of what they're looking for. So I think that's another great place to learn as well.
Wow, that's really, really interesting, and definitely very good tips, I think, that you gave to the listeners. And that was it, Julie. That's the podcast for today. I'm really, really happy to have you here, and I would like to thank you very, very much for for participating. It's been really a pleasure for me having you here. I have learned a lot from you. You inspire me a lot, and I will leave all your social networks in the description so that in case anyone wants to follow you or to contact you, that they can. And yeah, thank you very much again.
Thanks so much for having me. And yeah, anyone that has any questions or needs anything at all, I'm always around and always happy to help.
Cool. So thank you very much again, and see you in the next podcast. Bye-bye.